Chapter 71. Membership in the Congregation. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 1 to 6. He that is wounded in the stones, or hath his privy member cut off, shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. A bastard shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to his 10th generation shall he not enter into the congregation of the Lord. An Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. Because they met you not with bread and with water in the way, when ye came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam the son of Beor of Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse thee. Nevertheless, the Lord thy God would not hearken unto Balaam, but the Lord thy God turned the curse into a blessing unto thee, because the Lord thy God loved thee. Thou shalt not seek their peace, nor their prosperity all thy days forever. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 1 to 6. The assembly of the Lord referred to in this text means the covenant community, both civil and ecclesiastical. These laws, therefore, have reference to church and state equally. They do not govern faith, but simply membership. All of the excluded persons could become believers, and indeed were welcomed into the covenant community. The book of Ruth gives us a beautiful illustration of this. To enter into the congregation means to become a potentially governing member of the covenant, an elder or ruler, for example. We would call it voting membership and eligibility for office. The purpose of these laws is to protect the community from becoming diluted by people whose moral background is a poor or bad one. In verse 2, for example, a bastard is excluded to the 10th generation. This did not exclude success and eminence on the part of the descendants of a bastard. For example, David was the 10th generation after the birth of Pharez, a bastard. His was a distinguished ancestry in spite of this fact, and David's father Jesse was a wealthy and notable sheepman. His great-grandfather Boaz was clearly a man of great character. The purpose of the law was to protect society. It was not an infallible protection, but it still was a good one. It is interesting to note that Jewish and Christian scholars have done so much to confuse the meaning of the word bastard, mamzer. Some hold that it refers to the children of incestuous unions, while others refer it to the interracial unions. We can safely assume the usual meaning of the word. Another problem is relating it to Western American history. Some years ago, on the American frontier, isolated ranchers were far from a town where a marriage license could be obtained. A circuit rider or a Sunday school missionary then performed the service. There was then no civil record of a marriage, nor of the births of their children. Within my lifetime, some people, on discovering this fact, were horrified and concluded that they were bastards. This was not true, religiously or civilly. These were stable marriages, and the states recognized them. In verse 1, the law bars eunuchs from membership. They could not be eligible for office in church nor state. While eunuchs have in history at times been great leaders, normally their lack of a stake in the future has made them present-oriented and practical existentialists. Castration was forbidden in the covenant community. For their faithfulness, God makes remarkable promises to eunuchs in Isaiah chapter 56, verses 3 following. In Acts chapter 8, verse 27 following, we read of the conversion of a prominent eunuch, a high officer under Queen Candace of Ethiopia. These laws have been called Israel's immigration laws. They are emphatically not that. Immigration laws protect the nation by state discrimination, which can be good or bad, whereas these laws establish the discrimination on the family level. The key to survival is the family and its integrity. Membership in the covenant community is through the family, and therefore these protective laws apply to the family. If the family does not maintain standards, the nation cannot. In verses 3 to 6, we have the very specific exclusion of the Ammonites and Moabites for 10 generations. This refers to Ammonite and Moabite families, not apparently to girls of these peoples who married into the covenant people and absorbed their earlier beliefs. In the case of Ruth, we see that the bastardy status barred office to the 10th generation, David of all Pharez's descendants. At the same time, Ruth, having abandoned the Moabite faith to become a covenant believer, was regarded as a mother in Israel. The patriarchal nature of the family in those days meant that the woman took the man's status. The ban on mixed marriages or on unequal yoking applied where the wife was not a convert. The ban on Ammonite and Moabite to the 10th generation is important. The Berkeley version reads, "No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the congregation of the Lord down to the 10th generation." The reasons given for this are, first, we see that, although they were a people closely related by blood to the Hebrews, they sided with the Canaanites against their kin. They refused to provide Israel with bread and water in the way as they moved from Egypt to the borders of Canaan, verse 4. Second, Ammon and Moab hired Balaam to curse Israel, verse 4. Both countries were still aware of the faith of Israel and their own ancestral faith. For this reason, they sought out Balaam, who still had a semblance of Jehovah worship. They thus sinned with knowledge in that they recognized the reality of the true faith while seeking a life in freedom from the true God. Third, we are told, "Nevertheless, the Lord thy God would not hearken unto Balaam, but the Lord thy God turned the curse into a blessing unto thee, because the Lord thy God loved thee." Verse 5. This verse confronts us with the curse. Modern man wants to believe in a purely this-worldly causality, whereas the curse bluntly confronts us with God as the absolute cause of all things. Too often people relegate curses to the Old Testament, but we see St. Paul in Galatians chapter 3 verses 10 to 13 declaring that to break God's law is to place ourselves under his curse. Christ's atonement frees us from that curse to make us his people. This, however, does not make the law null and void except as a handwriting of ordinances, Colossians chapter 2 verse 14, that is, a legal bill of indictment against us. The law to the redeemed is their charter of freedom, the perfect law of liberty, James chapter 1 verse 25. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 15 following gives us the meaning of the curse on a lawless society. Ammon and Moab are under God's curse because they refuse to give a very simple form of help, either freely or for money. Their ill will led them to hire Balaam to curse Israel, but their perspective was humanistic. They believed that the power to curse rests especially with certain seers and psychics rather than with God. Their premise was that God can be manipulated and controlled by man. This meant a control of God by this world, a belief that the primary determination of all things is from man rather than God. We have this premise with us still in Arminianism, scientism, sociology, and other spheres of thought. Leviticus chapter 26, verses 14 to 46 also gives us the premise for God's cursing, namely, disobedience to his law. Psalm 1 gives us the two ways of life. The way of blessing is a Delight in the law of the Lord, verse 2, whereas the ungodly are accursed and are like the chaff which the wind driveth away, verse 4. Endurance and permanence in history are with God's blessed ones. Finally, we are told with respect to the accursed, Thou shalt not seek their peace nor their prosperity all thy days forever, verse 6. The Berkeley version reads, Never in all your days may you seek their peace or prosperity. We are not permitted to help God's enemies. Modern foreign, commercial, and personal policy is to favour those who can further our purposes, irrespective of their evil character. Writers on foreign policy routinely demand that we set aside all considerations other than national self-interest in dealing with the nations. They see moral standards as an impediment. So far have we strayed as a nation. There's an important sidelight on verse 1. At the time of the early church, non-Christians knew that the castrated were not permitted to enter the clergy, although welcome in many pagan cults. As a result, the clergy were often castrated to disqualify them from their calling. At the First Council of Nicaea, AD 325, Canon 1 ruled that such men could continue in their work. If, however, they castrated themselves to conform to pagan demands and avoid death, they had to be demoted. Much later, the apostolical canons, Numbers 21 to 24, restated this ruling, although it made an exception for men born eunuchs, for which there is no biblical warrant. There's an interesting history to the law concerning bastards. It was routinely violated in early medieval Europe by monarchs who made their bastards into abbots and bishops, and also kings. They also felt free to practice various sexual vices, including homosexuality. Freedom from the law was called a royal privilege. Whereas God requires greater faithfulness where there is greater responsibility, the concept of the royal privilege meant freedom from accountability. In time, the nobility adopted the concept. During the Renaissance, Brantôme tells us that the nobility saw incest as their privilege. Popes made cardinals of their bastards, and Christians mourned. After the Enlightenment, and especially with Romanticism, the royal privilege, exemption from God's moral law, became the privilege of artists and then actors. The separation of responsibility and accountability from authority and rank is an aspect of the fall. When men see themselves as gods, they will then behave like the pagan gods. More than a few Roman emperors saw their status as one which exempted them from moral limitations, so that their incipient divinity required flagrant immorality.